General Hospital will reveal the shockwave that had rippled through the courtroom when Sasha tearfully declared that Michael was the father of her unborn child, had seemed to everyone watching like the climactic turning point in an already volatile custody battle. Her voice had trembled, her contractions had visibly begun, and Michael's fierce outburst against Rick's ruthless line of questioning had only reinforced the illusion that Sasha was speaking from a place of deep personal truth. For a fleeting moment, it appeared as if all the pain, the chaos, and the betrayals that had led them to this courtroom were about to find resolution in the idea of a new family being born, one rooted in love, sacrifice, and second chances. But that moment was a mirage, and behind its glow was a storm waiting to be unleashed. Carly, who had watched the entire spectacle from the gallery with tightly clenched fists and a mind racing far faster than her pulse, didn't fall for it. She had stood behind Michael through every triumph and every failure, every moral compromise, and every heartbreak. She had seen his loyalty used against him too many times, had witnessed how love could blind him to the truth, and she had vowed never again to let someone exploit her son's goodness. Sasha's trembling voice and panicked tears may have swayed the judge, the audience, and even Michael himself, but not Carly. Her instincts, sharpened by years of battles both in courtrooms and boardrooms, told her that something was terribly wrong, and, when instincts weren't enough, share a light on facts. Without revealing her intentions to anyone, Carly quietly arranged for a DNA test. She knew the risk. If she was wrong, it would fracture an already fragile situation. But if she was right, if Sasha was lying, it could save Michael from walking willingly into a trap that could ruin him. She found a nurse she trusted implicitly, someone unaffiliated with either side of the custody war, and made sure every step of the process was airtight, confidential, and legally sound. And when the envelope finally arrived, sealed with the weight, for irrevocable truth, Carly opened it with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the gravity of what she suspected would be inside. The results confirmed her worst fears. Michael was not the father. The paper felt heavier than it should. It was more than just a medical document. It was a weapon, a revelation, a betrayal in black and white ink. Carly sat for a long moment, her mind reeling. She felt a hurricane of emotions: rage, disbelief, sorrow, but above all, a desperate urgency to protect her son from the fallout. And then across the room she saw Michael, his arm around Sasha, his eyes shining with a hope she hadn't seen in him for years. He believed he was about to be a father again. He believed he was reclaiming the family he had lost. He believed, and that belief was the most dangerous thing of all. Carly wanted to scream. She wanted to rush across the courtroom and rip the illusion from everyone's eyes, but she didn't. Not yet. She knew timing was everything, especially when the stakes were this high. If she exposed the truth now, in the midst of Sasha's labor and Michael's fragile emotional state, it could backfire in ways none of them were prepared for. But if she waited too long, Michael could be drawn even deeper into a false future. One built on manipulation, and worse, own a child that wasn't his. The war in Carly's heart wasn't just about strategy. It was maternal. It was primal. She knew she would reveal the truth. The only question was when and how devastating the consequences would be. Meanwhile, Sasha remained unaware of the blade hanging above her. To her, the courtroom confession had been a calculated risk, one she believed necessary to shift public and judicial sentiment in Michael's favor. She had told herself that she was helping him, that aligning herself with him again publicly and emotionally could humanize him in the eyes of the court. And somewhere in her shattered heart, maybe she had even believed it. After all, Michael had stood by her during her darkest moments. He had buried a child with her. He had forgiven her relapses and loved her when she couldn't love herself. And now she told herself it was her turn to give him something back. But it wasn't love that she gave. It was a lie. In her own mind, Sasha had convinced herself that the truth was too dangerous. No one knew the identity of the baby's real father. Perhaps not even her. It could have been a faceless stranger from that night at Brown Dog. A night clouded by emotional pain, alcohol, and perhaps even coercion. Or perhaps it was someone far more dangerous, someone with power, someone watching, someone who had promised protection in exchange for silence. Sasha didn't want to remember, didn't want to face the possibilities. So she reached for the only name that brought her a sense of safety. Michael's. She knew he would never question her, at least not publicly. She knew he would defend her because that's who he was. And that's what made her betrayal even more cruel. What Sasha had not accounted for was Carly. She had underestimated a mother's fury. She had overlooked the depth of Carly's love for her son and the length she would go in order to protect him. The moment Carly received that DNA test result, the entire trajectory of Sasha's plan began to collapse. And though Sasha didn't know it yet, her world was about to fall apart. As the courtroom prepared for its next session, the tension in the air was unbearable. Michael, unaware of the storm gathering behind him, remained focused on Sasha's well-being, attending to her with quiet tenderness that only deepened Carly's internal agony. Willow across the aisle watched with a mixture of confusion and suppressed rage, sensing that her control over the narrative was slipping away. Drew whispered to his attorneys, already crafting a response to Sasha's shocking confession, unaware that an even greater shock was imminent, and Carly sat motionless, the DNA results in her bag, her heart a battlefield between timing and truth. She could wait until Sasha was stable. She could confront Jason first, demand to know what he knew, if he too had been duped, or if he had been complicit in protecting Sasha's lie. She could deliver the truth privately to Michael, break his heart in silence, or she could let the courtroom become a stage for the ultimate reveal. Whatever she chose, it would not be easy. The fallout would be brutal. But she knew this much. No lie, no matter how well-intentioned, no matter how desperate, could be allowed to stand unchallenged, not when it put Michael's life, future, and sanity at risk. And so, with the truth burning in her hands and the weight of her son's future pressing on her shoulders, Carly took a deep breath and prepared for the inevitable reckoning, because some secrets don't stay buried. Some lies demand consequences. And when they come from someone you once trusted, once mourned with, once called family, the betrayal cuts deeper than any courtroom battle ever could. Michael, a man desperately attempting to claim control over the chaos that had become his life, was unknowingly building his redemption on a foundation made of sand. Every calculated risk he took, every word he delivered in court, every display of paternal devotion toward Sasha's unborn child, all of it was rooted in a belief that would soon be proven false. He believed he was fighting for his family, for a future shaped by resilience and sacrifice. But instead, he was anchoring himself to lie so corrosive that once exposed, it would not just undermine his credibility, it would shatter the very narrative he had carefully constructed. The trust he placed in Sasha, the woman he once believed had carried his child through trauma and loss, was not just sentimental, it was strategic. Her presence in court was meant to humanize him in front of the judge, to balance the calculated attacks from Willow and Drew with the image of a man committed not only to Y and Amelia, but also to a new child born of compassion and connection. But in that calculated gamble, Michael became blind to reality. His emotional vulnerability, exploited by Sasha's timing and tearful confession, left him exposed. His furious defense of her during Rick's interrogation, his trembling hands as here ached for her during her contractions, the tears that quietly fell as he believed he was about to become a father again. All of it was genuine, but it was also tragically misinformed. What made this situation more volatile than any Michael had faced before was not just the lie itself, but the web of deception that entangled others. Chief among them was Jason, the man who'd claimed paternity of the child in Annafort to shield Michael from legal and personal scrutiny. Jason's loyalty once again became a double-edged sword. His silence was meant to protect his friend, but now it implicated him in the concealment of a damaging falsehood. He found himself in a moral purgatory, unsure whether his allegiance to Michael should outweigh his responsibility to the truth, and caught between Carly's simmering wrath and Michael's unquestioning trust. Carly, after all, had always seen Jason as the one constant in her life who never lied to her, who never chose others over her family. But now, as she held the DNA results proving Michael was not the father, her emotions toward Jason were torn in two. She appreciated the lengths he went to protect Michael, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. If Jason knew the truth, why hadn't he come to her? Why had he allowed Michael to fall so far into this illusion? And if he didn't know, then what did that say about his judgment? And how deep did the deception go? Meanwhile, Willow, who had initially appeared rattled by Sasha's courtroom declaration, was beginning to see a sliver of opportunity forming through the cracks of the carefully staged drama. The narrative had briefly tilted in Michael's favor, painting him as a devoted father-to-be, a man building a new life with Sasha and their unborn child. But if the truth of the paternity test emerged, that illusion would collapse instantly. Willow would no longer need to rely on evidence of infidelity or emotional instability. The mere fact that Michael willingly and publicly embraced a lie that challenged both logic and legal prudence would be enough to argue that he was unfit to parent. It wouldn't matter that he believed he was doing the right thing. What mattered was that he failed to question, to verify, to protect himself and his children from manipulation. Sasha's lie, bolstered by Michael's blind faith, had handed Willow the greatest weapon she could ever hope for. A narrative in which Michael became Thevry, thing he had accused her of being reckless, emotionally compromised, and incapable of sound judgment. Yet, even as she mentally recalibrated her strategy, Willow was unaware that Carly already possessed the smoking gun that could turn everything on its head. The DNA results weren't just a piece of evidence, they were a crucible holding within them potential to exonerate or destroy depending on how and when they were revealed. And so the question hung in the air like a suspended sentence. What would Carly do with the truth? Would she unleash it immediately in a fit of maternal fury, casting Sasha's betrayal into the spotlight and obliterating Michael's momentary sense of peace? Or would she wait? Choose a moment when its impact would be most devastating to Willow and Drew's alliance, turning it into a legal tactic rather than a personal retaliation. The dilemma was as strategic as it was emotional. Carly understood the courtroom's politics, but she also understood the damage that could be done to Michael if the truth came crashing down too soon, too fast. Every second that passed increased the stakes. Michael, unaware of the ticking clock above his head, continued to act as if the future he envisioned was still attainable. He spoke to attorneys about nursery plans. He signed legal documents with hands trembling not from fear, but from overwhelming emotion. He stood beside Sasha with a kind of reverence that made Carly's heart ache, not because it wasn't real, but because it was misguided. And the deeper he sank into this fantasy, the more catastrophic the eventual reckoning would be. And so beneath the courtroom's solemn decorum and procedural formalities, the real battle waged on. A collision of love, lies, and legacies that would leave no one unscathed when the truth finally exploded. Amid the psychological storm swirling through the courtroom, one fact loomed above all else, irrefutable and devastating in its simplicity. The child at the center of this high-stakes legal battle. The infant, whose very existence was being used as a cornerstone for arguments about parenthood, stability, and the right to raise a family, did not belong to any of the men whose names had been uttered with conviction and emotion in sworn testimonies. The true father's identity remained shrouded in silence, a phantom hovering just outside the reach of certainty. Yet the weight of that buried truth was already pressing down on the hearts, minds, and futures of everyone connected to the lie. With each passing hour, that truth, still cloaked in secrecy, threatened to collapse the fragile structures hastily erected around it. It beat like a hidden pulse beneath the surface of every decision, every whispered conversation, every document submitted to the judge. No matter how tightly the lie was woven, it could not hold forever. And as the truth pressed closer to the surface, the very foundations of multiple lives began to tremble. Willow, whose initial strategy had unraveled with Sasha's unexpected confession, now stood at the edge of a new path. The DNA truth could become the turning point in her favor, offering not only the chance to dismantle Michael's legal standing, but also to prove that this emotional judgment had become too clouded to distinguish truth from manipulation. Her attorneys, already recalculating their approach, knew that if the false paternity claim became public knowledge, it would lend credence to every one of Willow's concerns about Michael's stability, emotional impulsivity, and questionable fitness, Asa full-time parent. And then there was Sasha. Whether driven by desperation, delusion, or fear, she had placed herself at the center of a maelstrom with no exit. She may have believed that a lie told out of love or fear could still serve a noble purpose. That if she could help Michael win custody, she might be redeemed for her past, for her losses, for her addiction, for every moment she'd felt powerless. But Sasha had not simply fabricated a detail. She had created a false identity for an unborn child. And that child's future was now tangled in a courtroom chess match rooted in deception. When the truth came out, and it inevitably would, it would be more than her credibility at stake. It would be her sanity, her safety, and her place in Michael's life. But above them all, above the tangle of broken loyalties, legal maneuvers, and emotional landmines, stood Carly. She held the truth, not in abstract speculation or whispered suspicions, but in hard clinical evidence. The DNA test in her possession was not just a scientific result. It was the trigger for a reckoning. A match struck and held in trembling fingers, waiting to ignite the inferno that would change everything. Carly had always known the power of timing. In battles fought across boardrooms, bedrooms, and courtrooms, she had learned that the moment of attack mattered as much as the weapon itself. She could reveal the truth immediately and obliterate Sasha's credibility in front of the judge, unraveling the narrative Michael had used to anchor his case. Or she could wait, bide her time, and deploy the revelation when it would cause the most damage to Drew and Willow's arguments, perhaps at a moment when they felt closest to victory. Either way, the detonation would be nuclear. She understood the cost. She knew what it would do to Michael, tow his heart, his pride, and his already fragile sense of peace. But she also knew what would happen if she said nothing. The lie would take root and tangle itself in every decision moving forward, and eventually destroy Michael from the inside out. She had watched it happen before with Morgan, with Sunny, with Jax. Lies, when allowed to fester, had a way of becoming irreversible tragedies. And so Carly stood on the edge of that moment, a woman holding more than just the future in her hands. She held the fate of an entire courtroom, the trajectory of multiple lives, and the haunting possibility that exposing the truth could break her son before it saved him. But she also knew with unrelenting certainty that this was not a truth that could remain buried. The baby in question was not Michael's, and every second spent pretending. Otherwise was another second stolen from justice, from honesty, and from whatever fractured path forward they still had left. Sooner or later, that truth would breach the walls of secrecy. The tsunami would hit, the gavel would fall, and when it did, no one, not Sasha, not Michael, not Willow, not Jason, would escape unscarred. Because this time the Lee wasn't just a mistake, it was a bomb. And Carly, whether she liked it or not, was the one who held the fuse.